All right. Well, I believe I'm live again for episode 6 of my vlog series. Again, I'm going to try to do this for a while and see if I still enjoy it. But right now, I'm still enjoying it. And it's also kind of fun to go back over what I have been doing over the past X period of time. Makes me reflect and think about what last week was and focus for this week. So I'm enjoying it. Yeah. Anyways, let me know if you're here. Chat and say hi. I don't really expect a lot of people to show up to this, but like I said, as it goes, we'll chat, and I'll take the topic where it goes. All right. What have I been doing this last week? All right. It's St. Patty's Day. It is St. Patrick's Day. So happy St. Patrick's Day. Figured I'd toss that out. So I put some St. Patty's Day stuff on my slide. But last week was kind of a busy week, I suppose. It was a short travel week, but busy travel week. I had 5 presentations, either live streams or on stage. And this is the first time I had to kind of figure out how I'd handle like an all-day conference where I'm doing a couple different things. I'm just counting it as one presentation. So maybe not as reflective of how much prep goes into it, but it at least makes it to where I can just track it in my numbers, I suppose. So I'm at 35 presentations. I'll go through what those were this week. No new education hours. However, this afternoon, I will be having a policy writing class. I feel so disingenuous being the guy talking about policy specifically. That was all Matt Topper. That was all Tony Miller and people that did the policy work. But now I've been working on this course with Sheldon for, I guess, 4 years now. We've been teaching people the concepts of what need to be in effective policy to meet safeguards and show the accessibility of those safeguards in their breadth, and also to have a functional document. So that'll be coming up again. I'll have a class, so I'll be teaching again today. For, I guess, 5 hours this week, whatever it is. All right, last week, what happened? So it started off with a me failure. Last week started off with a Matt failure. I wanted to make Cyberrise, I still want to make Cyberrise, the charity, exist in its own identity plane, exist in its own mail plane. That means its calendars, its recordings, its management, its data all exist under the Cyberrise's entity. But additionally to that, I want each program to have their own subtenant. So each tenant is there, and one of them was framework mapping, was our first kickoff meeting, and I asked Veronica to schedule it with that identity, which she did exactly as asked. And then I had the former list of names of everyone that we had been inviting that I invited by forwarding that email and that calendar invite. I did it from my Pax8 identity, and I didn't realize that then scrubbed the link. So the calendar invite came to everybody accepted it until it was time to go join, and then there's nothing to join. So I think like in the scramble, we got 20, 30 people on, but there was a bunch of people that did not make it because of that. And that was all my fault. So if you're wondering what happened there, that was me. I didn't vet it. I didn't check the outcome. So I didn't inspect what I expect, and I failed, and it caused failure there. All right. So that was the beginning of last week. And then I had a live stream with Andrew Morgan. I got blessed enough to be able to join and talk about CIS, which I'm extremely passionate about, and frameworks in general, on the kickoff call, talking about the threat report from CrowdStrike. And it was pretty good because a lot of that is exactly what I'm believing and seeing, right? This pivot to identity centrism, social engineering attacks, living off the land, all the things, just all the things. And so it was a great conversation. But I think the best part of it was, the question was asked, how do we train our users? Clearly that's not working. Agreed. But in the same breath, like, we need to make it easier for users to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong. And it's about effectively, in my opinion, implementing the safeguards and controls to a broad and deep degree. And that can help mitigate a lot of those things. And having mutual validation procedures for your MSP would be valuable, those kind of things, right? So that was a great talk. That was one of my first presentations, was that one. The next one was the vlog, obviously. And then all day Monday, I had either new products that I'm looking at. People are trying to hire people to do thought leadership work and such, and getting to look at a few different products there that are trying to come to the channel. That was fun. And then CIS and Pax8, got to have a great conversation with CIS about just kind of how do we broaden the capabilities and deepen the capabilities inside the MSP community around CIS. Obviously, I don't hide it. I'm quite the advocate for the Center for Internet Security's critical controls. And then it was jumping on a plane. That was Monday afternoon. Got to Irvine, California, decently late, I suppose, whatever, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever that is. And then got up first thing in the morning and did the presentation for Momentum, which was interesting because it wasn't a huge group of people. I think there were like 35 or so MSPs that came, but it was pretty good questions, deeply, deeply, deeply engaged on the things that we were talking about. I did 2 modalities of education. One was a talk that I do on the what, the how, the tool, and the proof. Like, basically start with the safeguard you're trying to achieve, break it into its smaller whats, break it into those smaller whats or broader whats or deeper whats it may ever be, right? And then to take that into the how would I accomplish each one of those whats. And once I know that, those are kind of the design parameters for each tool. And then once the tool's selected, that might change the how, and just walk them through that exercise. And that went pretty well. And then the second hour was walking through. I guess I have one more presentation, but anyways, I didn't break it into 2 or 3. But the second one in that was a kill chain analysis, basically making an advocation that you take a modern breach that's well written, at least has some context, talks about what happened, gives you some detail, and then break that into its kind of like what we think happened, like make some conjecture as to what failed, and then what safeguards failed in that regard. And it's just a great way to think about the safeguards from the other side, from the ones that don't return, from the dead bodies, right? So that was a good one. I think a lot of people there, and I'm still surprised by this, but I don't know why. Rarely does anybody raise their hand that they're doing any type of adversarial training, like learning something, like learning a technique, or digging in and learning how to do your own attacking a little bit, just to understand like what's happening there, just to be able to not be great at it, but just to understand and have contextual contact points that what's happening there, and you can make some conjectures what's happening. It'll make you a better person at doing that kill chain analysis we just talked about. It'll make you better at doing the application of safeguards, I think. So we would never try to purport to learn or stop football from gaining yards, stop an offensive team from gaining yards on you without ever knowing how they're going to do offense, right? We wouldn't do that. So I guess continuing that forward, my next presentation. So then I flew actually that night, flew and got in at like 9 o'clock or so in Chicago from Irvine, California. It was at least a straight through flight, 3.5, 4 hours on the plane. It's great. You can watch a couple movies. And then got in, basically ate something. I during that time was up for an award. I was up for a community leadership award from GTIA. It was awesome. Thank you. And instead of me being there to accept it, I was sitting on an airplane watching some B-rated movie, probably, or B-rate movie. And instead the awesome Ryan Walsh went and accepted my award for me. So it was really cool. I was having Walsh go up, and people teased that I'd lost weight and shaved my beard and grown some hair and gotten nicer. And I'll cry my way out of here. No, I tease. But it was awesome to have Ryan Walsh go up and accept for me. So that was pretty dope. And then that next morning, which is what I flew in that night for, right? So Tuesday I spoke all day, rushed to the airport, sat for a minute, got on an airplane, slept for a minute, watched movies, got up the next morning. And then that's Wednesday. We had at GTIA, at the CCF, Communities and Councils Forum, I had a presentation with Miles. And what was interesting was I've been on the Trustmark working group for a couple years. I don't know how long it's been, but a while. And in that working group, we've seen an aspirational ask, well above where people's maturity is, turn into a response that is of equal level of maturity as being asked, right? Like it kind of makes sense, or of what we predicted. The problem is we didn't have great guidances to get people there, and instead of adding more controls in version 2, which we're coming up with, we changed it to be version 2 being much more of a guiding principle. That 2 is more about the feel and the function and getting people through and making it more usable, user friendly, those kind of aspects of getting people through Trustmark. And so Miles, to that end, was starting to write prompts, and I am starting to do the visuals. Why the visuals? Because when you're staring at something and it tells you have to have username and MAC address and first name and purpose and department and all these things, and you see one not checked off, it's quite visually understood that you've missed something, right? And so when we were breaking those down, the visuals for the 170 plus safeguard or controls in the Trustmark, Miles was also writing these prompt questions like, what can you do to show and prove that access control lists are in place on these data sets? How can you, just questions to prompt the users to better understand the meaning of the safeguard by contextual relevance through these questions that force you to think about it, right? And what was very interesting is as Miles was just kind of shotgunning these questions, he saw my visuals and said, oh my God, I could just use these visuals to figure out whether or not I have a question for this, right? Like whether or not I actually have a question ready for this or not. And so he did, and we started slapping those visuals together, his prompts on top of my visuals. And so all that to say that at CCF that morning at 10 a.m., we presented that. And what's funny is, and this is what gives my heart a little bit of hope and a little bit of positivity after my macabre first of the year, prediction, is that last year when we did stuff about Trustmark and just talking about Trustmark in general and guidance for success and Trustmark, there were like 12-ish probably people in the room. And it would appear that in the room we were in for this day, there weren't chairs set out. There was just a few tables, I think 3 tables set out. And it was quite intended to have 12 or 13 people there having a deep conversation about CCF or about Trustmark, I'm sorry, at CCF. And instead we had like 50 people or something. Like we literally pulled out all the stacks of chairs as the conversation was starting to kick off, had robust questions, had people deeper in their understanding of the challenge, deeper and more aware of what they were going to be doing and working on. So like it was really good. I mean, it was great. It was a great atmosphere and a lot of people showed up. So that was like quite warming that people are at least taking it more seriously of trying to go through Trustmark and hold themselves to a certain standard. It gave us a lot of opportunity to clarify, like, this isn't about you and your clients. Like that may be a different lens on this at some point, but this is about you. How do you bring on a human? How do you empower them? How do you look for threats in your own environment? How do you manage your own vulnerability? How do you deal with your own governance, right? Those aspects. And a lot of people miss that the Trustmark is about your own world, something that you have the only governance and control thereof. All right. So that was Wednesday. Got through CCF. Lots of good friends. Oh, by the way, award. I didn't even say I didn't win the award. I got runner up to Henry Tim. So super dope. But also another good friend of mine won, right? Jason Slagle also won on the security leadership award. And so it was just super awesome to see that play out. But I did get a runner up award. So that's super, super cool. I now have 2 runner up awards. I'm always the bridesmaid, never the bride, but that's okay. I don't care. Ultimately, then after that, it was rough because I wasn't a Marriott hotel, which I do like to stay at Marriott's. And instead I had no ability to get a late checkout, which meant I had a live stream on Wednesday at 3:00 or 2:30 to prep in the green room, and then 3:00 live, that I had to have all my gear set up. I needed to demonstrate building a Kali Linux box and, or at least demonstrate using it and walking through it and talking about some of the tools and seeing what we had there. Anyways, did that presentation out in the middle of the hallway, and it was just loud and people walking around, and my gear wasn't doing great, and I had problems with my external monitor. That reminds me, I need to look at my external monitor and see why that's not functional. But anyways, I imagine you can only kick it off too many TSA stands before it bites the big one, even with foam. But ultimately, so we had our live stream, which is interesting because it was a live stream on just Kali Linux, and it wasn't even a really deep or even very broad or good one. I don't think it was just talking about adversarial techniques and advocating that people should spin up a Kali box, should go use Try Hack Me, should go learn some of these things. So just that kind of advocation. And already as we sit here, only four or so days later, we're at like 700 views of it, which is, nothing in the grand scheme of things to others, but it's pretty good. I mean, for that, talking, as an advocation that MSPs should learn about Kali. I'm going to continue doing more and more and more of these kind of adversarial demonstration type things as for the game, as long as they'll let me. And I'm just glad to see people, I think, starting to think about that. So it was great. So that was presentation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it's the end of my presentations. And then I flew home, and of course, another late flight. I'm at 20 flights total. Kat and I both are at 20 flights. And that last leg, I don't know. We're like at like 90% screwed this year. It's been such a high level of flight challenges, delays, cancellations, issues, plane breaks. I think one of them was missing a door clip that was on the before, so they had to change airplanes. And so we got home, I think 2 hours later, so nearing about midnight on Wednesday. Luckily, Thursday was a pretty open day, mostly just thought leadership work, and then tons of work on the beginnings of security boot camp and RSA, as well as my kind of just other subject matter things. It just turned into a subject matter week. I don't know why. All of Thursday was subject matter. All of Friday was, for the most part, subject matter stuff. I was with like Taylor Keith working on security boot camp. I got to hang out. I sent a meeting invite to Phyllis Lee as the Lee family reunion. got to hang out for an hour with Villas and just talk about certain things around CIS. In fact, it's funny. I looked at my heart rate and I must have been just doing this all day Friday because my heart rate was massively high all day. My stress level was majorly high, but it was stuff like talking about some of the things. I got to meet with Josh Franklin and Valicia. I can't remember her last name with CIS and talk about CIS controls version 9 and what I didn't like about 8, what I did like about 8, what's broken in 8, what's not broken in 8, what are the things that need to change, what are some of the ways you might see this play out, and some of the vision that I had there. It was awesome to get to lay down some of that thought process and kick that off. I have real thoughts on some of the challenges. I guess I'll say 2 of them. I think that every safeguard has a technical and an administrative side. I don't think you can ever have one that's purely administrative. I don't think you can ever have one that's purely technical, which means that why are we trying to represent those with one single sentence that intends to encompass both of those, or even with the descriptive language? So it doesn't let you work through it. And so my belief is that we should have something that helps serve those 2 paradigms, a paradigm in which we're thinking about the administrative aspects, the process flow, the documentation, the proof, the governance, those aspects, and one or we're just talking about the nerdy bits where we're putting on those nerdy lenses and being the nerdy bits side, right? What is the technical part of this control? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the goals? Those type of things. And so I believe and advocate for an A and a B side of all safeguards and assessment objectives to each of those A and B sides that allows you to very focus on the technical and not focus on the technical, focus on the administrative, not focus on the administrative. And where there's other guides and other things that already speak towards that, be able to reference those, right? I don't want to have that XKCD comic where we just invent another standard, but rather if there is already governance and policy driven language, such as in NIST CSF or in other things, then let's reference that in that A side. And it then gives real good clarity as to what we're talking about and how they tie together and how they integrate. So thoughts there. Some of the other things are like, you don't want me to get into this, it's too nerdy, but some of the nuanced challenges of the way the safeguards lay out and some of the things they've done. Like great example is asking us to classify data, but not defining classification of data until a much later IG2, IG3 type safeguard. Anyways, again, staying off the nerdy bits, but that's where my life is. And then after that controls V9 interview, I got to do a little bit more charity work, get caught up on some of my to-dos. So Jason Slagle and Robert Chaffee don't get to make fun of me. And then I had a meeting with Sunil Yu. I will tell you, like, Sunil Yu is so far ahead, almost all the time, sometimes too far ahead, out where we're painting in not realities, but usually right at that level of far ahead. One of the things that his conjecture is in a new company or a new thing he's working on through his existing company is how do we tackle the problem of kind of that shifting up the DIKW pyramid, right? The data, information, knowledge, wisdom pyramid, where traditional data and information security policies focus on the individual data sets, the individual pieces of data, their relevancy, their value, and tagging it, which is great, like totally the way to do it. But when you start getting into things like LLMs, they start heading higher into the knowledge side of things, where it's really hard to garner what information turns into sensitive information per se, right? When you have knowledge being able to be discerned from it. And so the approach is, and I'm bastardizing this and keeping it somewhat short, but the approach is measuring the output of the knowledge layer instead of measuring the output of the individual data layers, right? And by filtering that and making determinations of harm based on those conversations, then one could make a determination of then the underlying data and how to then regulate that potentially, as well as what you can do at the consumption layer of the LLM at the actual knowledge layer, like upon ingestion and output. What can we filter? What can we stop? What can we alert on? Those kind of things. It's just fascinating. I love talking to him. So that was a great hour of kind of digging into that. And then the final wrap up of the week was the IR game team meeting that Bob Miller has every week with the team. I sit in and disrupt things and make everybody hate me. And then I show up 5 weeks later and everybody's good with it. No, I tease, but I always have ideas and they've usually been covered. And I just don't have the time to dedicate to be there every single week for this meeting. So anyways, that was pretty much the week. I had 5 presentations, 4 flights, 2 nights in hotels, 4 cab rides, 3 new cities or 3 cities that I laid my head in and slept a night in across the course of that. Yeah. And that's pretty much it. I do love the weeks where I get to just talk about the challenges in the frameworks in our world. And I do very much believe and dream of at some point a world where we are doing assessments as code. And what I mean by that is at some point the ability to say, if we have a safeguard that's well defined enough that has syntactical errors gone, there's no superfluous ands or ors that make me make a decision that aren't really a decision. There's a comma space. and the language is easily measurable. If you can imagine that, and then which systems that applies to, which a lot of work went into in 8.1 to go down this, which systems it applies to kind of a aspect. And then you apply that to how should those different systems be configured based on these predominant systems like Intune, M365, Google, whatever those may be. And then you can go to which tools serve meeting those needs that are outside of the tool itself. And then you can say, how should those be configured? Everything out there is API at that point. All of that almost. If I'm built modern methodologies with, identity centrism and extensibility and other, platform service plays like M365, then everything's an API, being a little bit summative, but mostly that means that I could measure all of that. I could measure the settings, configurations, the tools, the deployment status, the status of that, the evidence being collected, the things could almost all be gathered as code. And that's one of the things that I have a mission towards and believe that that's going to help us scale that massively, right? It's the same reason we have the same assessments for new cars and the same assessments for airplanes and the same things that we do. We have standards that we follow. And I believe that our world is heading faster and faster towards assessments as code. In my belief, doesn't make me right, just loud about it. But yeah, got me off that tangent. It's nice when I get to deal with all legs of that, right? From CIS 9 to Trustmark to the framework mapping project that we're working on. Those are all elements in that aspect. And then you have others taking and doing more with that, like Trustmark, for example, using the framework maps and visuals. You have players like Cloud Capsule and others out there taking standards and using CIS as a way to measure it. Synthion's another example of that. And so you're seeing all these extensibilities of people adding capabilities around frameworks. And if we can make the frameworks better and capabilities better and all of those things, then we can start having actual actuarial data about separation of people from risk and security posture. We can actually mount a reasonable defense at scale. We can hold the large players accountable to do things that protect the masses. There's just all the things, at least my personal beliefs. But I won't bore everyone that's sitting here watching. I'm surprised to have a few of you here. If you're in the chat, say hey. Might just be cat on 2 devices. You never know. But anyways, last week was a travel week, and it was a very deep prep for presentations and then a lot of presentations week. This week is going to be I think no difference. I think I have no travel, but I do have at least 5 or 6 colors here that are already presentations. So probably doing at least 5 prezos and 2-hour classes. But I will see you next time. Thank you for being here. I sure appreciate it as I kind of vlog my life, I guess, on the road with Kat and I and all the travel for PAX 8 and all the other interests serving the mission.